Well, hello and welcome to another nose, but not just any nose, a very special nose. Tonight on a very special nose. So one of the movies from 2019, which you might have missed, is called Atlantics or Atlantique. It actually won second prize. It's complicated at Cannes, but if you win the Grand Prix, which sounds pretty good, I think that's actually second place. But that's still pretty good considering the fact that the filmmaker is, I think, making her first film ever, and also that she was the first black woman director ever to be featured at Cannes. So it is a Senegalese ghost story, love story, economic story. We'll tell you all about it in the second segment of today's show. We'll also talk about what you can tell about another person from that person's bookcases, or maybe what you can't tell about them. But we're going to begin by talking uncustomarily about the world of sports, except that the NBA these days is no longer, I think, exclusively simply a sport where you watch to see who wins and loses and who performs well. Increasingly, the NBA is kind of the epicenter, or it's kind of the thought leader about a whole bunch of different topics. They seem to have figured out the pandemic better than just about anybody, but that's not really why we're talking about them today. You probably know that on Wednesday and Thursday, they struggled with the whole question, they being the players, struggled with the whole question of whether to even continue playing their season after what had happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which was, of course, piled on top of everything else that has happened. So, yes, today we are going to talk on the nose about the rather unique position that the NBA now occupies. And we're going to do that with Jim Chapdelaine, who I happen to know is an NBA fan, Emmy-winning musician, producer, composer, recording engineer, and patient advocate for people with rare cancers. Tanisha Dugan, producing associate at TheaterWorks. She's joining us via the miracle of Skype, and just plain old me. So I'm going to have Jim get us going, because I think really Jim was one of the people kind of urging us to take that turn. See, now it just seems like Jim is not as excited about the NBA.
I caught my finger in a door.
Okay.
I was trying to dunk, and I got hooked up on the rim.
I guess my question is, I have so many different questions, but my question is, did the thing that happened this week, when it appeared as though they might in fact just suspend the entire NBA playoffs, the rest of the playoffs, they've since reconsidered that, but it was obviously quite a flexing of player muscle around this. Is this one of these things that really does kind of change the dynamic forever?
I mean, you could say that it was. It could have easily been a one-off. The NBA has done this before. Players have. Bill Russell was very outspoken in the 60s and certainly affected change. But this felt different because within 24 hours, I mean, the NHL was suspending playoffs in support of Black Lives Matter. Major League Baseball suited up and got out on the field as if they were playing a game, and went through before the first pitch was tossed, they walked off quite dramatically in solidarity, giving each other the tip of the cap and showing, solidarity. So it does seem to have rippled through sports. One of the interesting things for me is LeBron James has gradually, he could have been the Michael Jordan, right, who just stayed neutral on all of this to keep his sneaker deals. But he hasn't. He sort of evolved. And I think where he goes the NBA. And the young players like Jaylen Brown who are leading this kind of stuff. So For me, it was very exciting. It was exciting that they were back to play basketball. And then that they're leading this thing is even more exciting. Right.
Well, Tanisha, I know one of the thoughts that you've had is that the NBA is definitely uniquely poised to be a thought leader in the area of issues of race, right? I mean, it just has a slightly different constitution to it than other professional team sports.
They do. I mean, when they came back and the way they came back, kind of, holding on so firmly to Black Lives Matter and unabashedly saying, in some ways we're a Black organization. They are perfectly poised to sort of take on this moment. And I think in some ways, Jim, you brought up LeBron, and I feel like this is like LeBron giving a huge middle finger to Laura Ingraham and sort of saying like, oh, you told me that I should just shut up and play basketball. Oh, I'm absolutely not doing that because the moment demands too much of me. I mean, we are reliving the 60s, right? Like we are seeing Black entertainers, Black stars move into space and say, clearly our countrymen, regular Joes, are not enough to get you to pay attention, you being white America. So I guess we're going to have to shoulder the work. And it has been exciting to see other leagues follow. But the NBA has definitely set the table, racial justice. I mean, you're right. We're not talking about the pandemic today, but I wish the Department of Education was paying attention to what's happening there and understanding the kind of rigor and stringency you need to do all the things. To change the world, you need stringency, rigor, and bravery. And the NBA is sharing it in all spheres.
Yeah.
And all the bubbles.
Yeah. And all the bubbles. Yes, indeed. And I also think that there's a way in which there's the fan bases of various sports. They try to assert various kinds of ownership of those sports, right? So, I mean, one of the problems that the NFL has struggled with is that a lot of their fans are just not interested. I mean, beyond not interested, are openly hostile to the injection of racial politics into any of the ceremonial activities of the NFL, and they'll fight that pretty hard. And I think baseball has always also had this kind of pretty white and frequently conservative fan base, and also white and conservative players. There's a way in which the NBA, because its fan base is, I think, more ready, and the rosters tend to be somewhere around 75% of Black players. There are more Black coaches in the NBA, I think, by far than in any other sport. There's a way in which the NBA is really ready to be a thought leader on this question. But, Jim, there is also something just very radical about the idea, as you said at the beginning, this could have been a one-off. They could have said, we're not playing Thursday's games, but they really did seriously consider just not playing any games. And that, it does go back to something that Bill Russell said a long time ago during his career. He said, it's become apparent that for some people, we're acceptable as entertainers, but not acceptable as people. And I do think this is a group of athletes who are, I'm babbling here, but I mean, to Tanisha's point, this whole shut up and bounce the ball, or shut up and sing, or shut up and, I think that's what's over right now. The ability of conservative pundits or anybody else to say to athletes or performers, shut up and do the one thing about you we actually care about. I think that might be what's over.
Yeah. There's other, as we're talking, it's just occurring to me, there's another unique thing, circumstance that probably plays into this more than we've thought about. And that is, remember, every NBA player is locked in at Disney World because they're in the playoffs right now. So when they didn't play those games, they were able to go and have these big conferences of players. And they have a very strong players union, probably one of the fairest in sports. So they didn't have to jump on a Zoom call. They could get together, and I'm sure they were all wearing masks because that's just how they're rolling, and actually talk about this in person and have lengthy, substantial conversations. I hadn't thought about that before, but they're all in one place, and that's never happened before.
Right.
So that might be an enabling factor. And the other thing that's enabling is the structure of the league, that they support their players, that they value the labor of their players, more so, I think, than the other leagues do so far.
And I think, yes, they're mostly, they value the labor, but I think you said some, Colin, when you sort of alluded to the fact that that's a league where the leadership reflects the labor. And that is not wholly true in many entertainment sectors, and it's definitely not true in other sports leagues. I mean, in the NFL, for example, the vast majority of those players are Black, but the stars are white. The owners are white. The NBA has a different leadership, looks different for the NBA. And so the conversations that I think are happening because of proximity are also happening because there is a meshing of color lines. There is kind of an all America at the table at the NBA, which is not the case for other leagues. I mean, the MLB, right? I think I said in our email exchanges leading up to this, MLB is made up of a lot of immigrants, right? They get the job done. Those and so many, these Black and brown people are living the quote unquote American dream. And so many of them, were handed that starting in high school or college. And so the kind of mental gymnastics and the mental plantation, to use the language of the RNC, kind of started at a young age. And if you are a part of a league that benefits from that, it's a harder conversation to have, whether you're stuck together in Disney World, or trying to maintain a baseball season without a stadium to fill. So I think it's systemic, and the system of the NBA is structurally different than our other leagues.
Yeah, one thing that I've been thinking about is whether or not I wish that they kept the walkout or the strike or whatever you're going to call it going a little bit longer. Because I do think one of the things that's happening, and one of the things that they are responding to is, and it's probably no coincidence that this came to a boil during the week of the Republican National Convention, although obviously the Kenosha case is what drove it more than anything, is that, we increasingly inhabit these kind of hived off or siloed realities where certain kinds of information is either embraced or excluded depending on which silo you happen to be in. So, for example, yesterday President Trump was asked 3 times whether he was in a reporter meeting, whether he had watched the Jacob Blake tape, and he just never answered because he doesn't really want that to be even in his reality. And I think in doing what they did, the players were sort of saying, we're going to bring this issue to you, and the way we're going to do it is actually through our absence. You're going to tune in to watch the basketball playoffs, and they're not going to be there until you face up to the fact that this isn't a reality you can exclude. You can't really even construct society in a way that sort of takes out very valuable or important or disturbing pieces of information. But Jim, with that in mind, and I know you're a big Celtics fan, but I sort of thought, maybe a week or so would have really sent that message a little bit harder. Like, we are just not going to do the thing you want us to do until everybody sits down and admits or at least acknowledges what's happening.
I have to say, despite my love for the Celtics, I would support that 100%. And I love this part of what they're doing because they're using this capital that they've acquired and spending it wisely, I think. I have waited through COVID because there's only so much Netflix, so there's only, we're defined by the media we consume these days because there isn't a lot, especially if you're a working musician who is unable to go back to work until phase 5. I'm kind of done with Netflix. So I was really looking forward to the playoffs. But I'm happy if the playoffs don't happen and this results in progress in this area because we're at this sort of flashpoint now. Peripheral to this, we're seeing weird violence break out everywhere. And it's actually kind of cool to see a protest with absence, like you said, instead of showing up and screaming. They're saying we're not showing up at all. And I think that's a pretty powerful statement. If you or I don't show up, people, in my case, probably are happy. But if they don't show up, that's a big deal.
Right. And
well, it would be a big deal if you guys didn't show up and then inserted a Black or brown person in your place, right? Yeah, that would send a message. Your version of this thing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I always say there are very few people in the world who are kind of indispensable But LeBron James is probably one of them. If LeBron James doesn't show up, there really is nobody who can take his place. I do want to say, just to get it on the record here, that there's other things going on and within the NBA and within the world of athletics, and actually not just the NBA but the WNBA as well. We're remiss not to mention them. So there's a project called More Than a Vote, which is also led partly by LeBron James, and which is all about addressing the question of voter suppression, making sure that there are not organized efforts to exclude persons of color from being able to vote when and where they're supposed to be able to vote. I should shout out Renee Montgomery, a former UConn women's star, who's played a very, very big role in all this. And actually, she's not playing in the WNBA this year. I think it's mainly she's one of the players who's elected to, because of COVID, not to do this, but also because I think she's from Georgia, and I think she wants to be really involved in this whole question. And Tanisha, that's to me, that's a very encouraging thing, because a strike can send a very powerful symbolic message, but this is kind of opening the hood and getting in underneath it and really seeing if you can fix the engine and make it work properly. I'm sort of glad that athletes are doing both of those things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wish that we had a different group of folks, a collection of folks in our government, because I think, the necessary next step is aligning with the powers that be to shift the needle. I don't see a Kennedy Baldwin, sports summit coming out of this. But I think that organizing work that they're doing is, in terms of getting out the vote, is helpful. I think figuring out how to move us to the table, because I think we all have to be honest about the great potential that we will continue with Donald Trump as the head of our government for some time. What does that look like? Like, how do you endure? How do you organize? How do you, continue the dream of an America that is built for us all, truly, all of us, for liberty and life and happiness? And I am excited to see kind of organize that LeBron and
we're getting a little Skype scramble here. Let me just
curious how that moves forward.
So, we're going to take a break pretty soon here anyway. Although the one thing that I do want to say, Jim, is another way that I feel that I can see this changing is just to shift sports for a second and also to exhibit a certain amount of Packer pride. So on the Packers, Aaron Rodgers really is one of the thought leaders on the team about racial issues and about making sure racial issues get addressed and crafting statements and all this kind of stuff. One of his counterparts in football of the New Orleans team, Drew Brees, kind of went the other way. This is like quite a few weeks ago now, and was questioning the value of kneeling during the national anthem and stuff like that. And he really lost that battle. He really had to back down. And this is the NFL, which is much more dominated by kind of a militaristic set of ties, a military set of ties, and has a much more conservative, especially in some markets, fan base. So the idea that Drew Brees ultimately kind of had to walk away from his first position, that tells me something too. I really do feel like the tide has shifted.
Yeah, I mean, we can be hopeful that it has. And I think you're right that there's something a little more militant about even the structure of football versus basketball. That's a whole separate discussion. I look at football like it's like metal music, and I look at basketball like it's jazz. There's a whole different sort of set of visuals and or abilities required for both. And clearly the appeal of both is, some people watch both. I kind of dropped football a couple of years ago. It just got too weird for me. And, Tom Brady. So I do think, yes, it's harder for a nuanced, full person to exist in the space of the NFL, like Aaron Rodgers, who's a complex individual with his own thoughts and stuff, than it is for someone like Drew Brees. Under normal conditions, the NFL would rally behind Drew Brees and all the semantics and symbolism that he would bring to the discussion. But I think you're right. It may have changed. I just want to say, when I was a freshman in high school, Bill Russell came to our town, and he spoke in this little church, and I was able to get an invitation. And it was I was already a basketball fan, but it was one of the most moving things I've ever experienced, because he didn't talk about basketball at all. He talked about social change. And for those of us who were waiting to hear about how to dunk, it was an eye-opening, like it was amazing to find out that he was a human being instead of this rebound basketball genius. He was this deeply heartfelt guy who had really thought out opinions, and it had a great effect on me.
Yeah, the precursor to this week, by the way, was in '61. Russell and his black teammates on the Celtics refused to play an exhibition game because two of them, Satch Sanders and Sam Jones, had not been served at a lunch counter. They were in Lexington, Kentucky to do an exhibition game against the Atlanta Hawks, and they didn't play. Now, the game went on. The white players suited up, and two of the Hawks players also didn't play, and one of them, this is sort of extra credit reading, Cleo Hill, wound up being kind of the Colin Kaepernick of his era. He was a fabulously talented basketball guard, but because, in fact, he exhibited signs of racial consciousness on a team situated in Georgia, he ultimately, didn't have the career that he was supposed to have and was kind of blackballed.
There's a reason we don't say his name as much.
Right, exactly. But Google Cleo Hill and you'll hear some stories. All right, I think we should grab a quick break here. We're going to talk about bookshelves and also about a movie that we like quite a lot after this.
We couldn't stand to see our children shot dead in the streets. But when I finally took a knee, them crackers took me out the league. Now I'm not much for games, but I play for keeps. And we salute King James for using his change to create some equal opportunities. I'm writing about the book I read. I have to sing about the book I read. I'm embarrassed to admit it hit the soft spot in my heart when I found out you wrote the book I read.
So we are back, and we're about to talk about books you either have or haven't read and whether they're on your shelf or not with Jim Chapdelaine, Emmy-winning musician, producer, composer, recording engineer, and patient advocate for people with rare cancers. Tanisha Dugan, producing associate at Theater Works. She joins us via Skype. So this week, a writer named Jess McHugh posted a tweet. Tweets are now sort of like a content thing that we can actually look at as content. It was the top 7 warning signs in a man's bookshelf. Jess is a woman. 1, a dog-eared copy of Infinite Jest. 2, too much Hemingway. 3, any amount of Bukowski. 4, Ayn Rand, all capitals. Goethe, number 5 is Goethe. 6 is Lolita is my favorite book. And 7 is Fathers and Sons is my favorite book. So Tanisha, how do we feel about book shaming, or at least this kind of book ranking?
I don't wholly mind it. I do think it's funny that the lead up to this conversation was about tweets as content, and we can thank DGJT for that atrocity. But I'm not against it. I think it's cool, especially as you alluded. Am I Skype scrambling again?
A little bit, but not bad. No, not bad this time. You had a little problem in the previous segment. No, I was just going to say, I just wanted to contextualize it too. I want you to talk a little bit more. But 6,000 retweets. I forgot to say that when I was setting this thing up. 6,000 retweets, 3,000 or 4,000 comments appended to it. So, Tanisha, I think one of the things that makes tweets content, so to speak, is they're highly interactive. You know right away whether they have some significance to somebody. I was kind of meh about this whole list, but I was clearly in the minority. So anyway, continue with your thought.
So I love it because books do tell you a lot about the human beings that read them. I think have a longing and a mourning for my collection, because as I've moved, I've lost more and more books because they're heavy and cannot be easily transported. And as it goes, you sort of just keep the things that really matter to you, and not the whole collection. But I have loved in the Zoom life being able to kind of be voyeuristic about the people that I'm talking to, because the bookshelves have been the backdrops been the call, and it's been a nice way to keep time when I don't want to pay attention anymore.
Yeah, so one thing I thought about these particular books was I don't. Goethe is a problem for somebody. Turgenev is a problem for. First of all, it was a very sort of high class group of books in general that we were dispensing with. I mean, clearly.
Wait, Ayn Rand, come on.
No, Ayn Rand, I sort of get that. Although I don't know. I mean, growing up, I wouldn't keep a copy of Fountainhead, but like in high school.
But it tells you I understand the zeitgeist of the moment. I mean, that's what right? Like that's the reason. You kind of either want to see it and binge or want. Sorry, Jim, what were you going to say?
No. I like the fact that, it is sort of this intimate reveal of what's going on with a person. It's not only what they read, but it's what they aspire to read or and now with all the Zoom stuff and all the people appearing on television with carefully crafted and curated bookshelves, often a copy of their own book behind them. It's become a complete construct, So I was a sidebar to this. I'm curious how this bookshelf, this sort of, in this case, it looks like a very American male bookshelf. What does that bookshelf look like in 1950, 1960, et cetera, how much changes are there any books that remain through?
Well, yeah,
because it seems like they've tossed Hemingway out, right? And
yeah. So I'm not sure what point you're making. So you're saying certain books fall out of fashion.
I'm saying that this bookshelf evolves through time.
Yeah.
Whatever the bookshelf that is of this tweet, it doesn't exist in 10 years in the same way that it exists now as sort of an object of disdain.
Well, I go back to the Nick Hornby novel and the movie High Fidelity, where the character says, "You are what you like," and that's obviously his philosophy, and perhaps a philosophy that leads him astray from time to time. But I think at some level we partially all believe that, right? That the things that you like, the music, the movies, the books, the things that you like, the things that you care about culturally are, if not the sum total of who you are, because they're not, but they are really good signposts to, for somebody approaching you at a fork in the road. They do sort of tell you which way they will tell another person which way your path leads a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I get that if you see a lot of Hemingway or, in Ayn Rand, uncritically owned Ayn Rand collection, that might worry you.
I guess, I kind of like at the intersection of what you both are saying, right? Which is, I think that books particularly are as aspirational as they are things that are actually being read or have been read. And I also think it's a tell about where you were educated, right? Because so much of those, bookshelves, when they're not being performative, are the things that you purchased, because you had to. Or the things that you purchased because you were part of a social group that said this is the conversations we're having. I think it's kind of a both and situation. It is absolutely aspirational. It's totally like, this is who I want you to think I am. And then there's also,
and in that way, are they like a fashion sort of statement for some people?
Yeah.
I'm not saying they are or not, but they're part of the apparatus that you use to present yourself to the world.
Right. And I think they're also but you never know, just looking at the book, which kind of aspiration it is. For example, I own a not particularly dog-eared copy of Infinite Jest because it's a book that I start periodically, get 17 pages into, and give up. So it is my true aspiration to read Infinite Jest. I'm not trying to impress anybody by owning it. I'm trying to get myself
But you're
to
trying to impress yourself. Exactly. Yeah. And you can't quite get there.
Yeah,
right?
that could be it.
I have
only
that
20
with
pages.
Ulysses.
We have to shift tracks here pretty quickly because we have a pretty fascinating movie we want to discuss. It is called Atlantic or Atlantique, depending on which title issuance you prefer. Released in 2019, directed by a first-time Senegalese director, a protege to a certain degree of the French filmmaker Claire Denis. I want to just I should set up the plot a little tiny bit anyway. We meet a young woman named Ada. She is being romanced by a young man named Suleiman. He's a laborer on this kind of hideous-looking, kind of misshapen Frank Gehry-like tower in the city of Dakar. He and his coworkers are not being paid, and that turns into kind of a fulcrum. It causes him and his coworkers to get a boat and try to go to Spain and find more work. I don't want to do too many plot spoilers here, and various consequences ensue. We should say that Ada is about to marry up a bit to a more socioeconomically well-positioned young man that she doesn't really particularly care for, and strange occurrences happen right around the time of her wedding, which brings into the plot a young, handsome Senegalese policeman named Issa, who is supposed to investigate this, but he's got something weird going on with him too. He has a mysterious ailment which makes him faint and fells him. So I think I better stop there and not say too much more, other than to say the supernatural makes a whole bunch of different kinds of appearances right after that. So, first of all, Tanisha, is that a good job? I should stop there, right? I shouldn't say much more.
No, I think that's a really good synopsis, or not spoiler alert synopsis. What's interesting as you were talking and I kind of connecting it to our last conversation about books and fashion is that I kind of feel like this movie felt a little bit to me like an aspirational like film. Like I would have this film on my bookshelf, the DVD, if that were in fashion today.
Yeah.
Because as I said to you guys earlier, I was like, I kind of felt like a stupid person trying to get through this movie. And I am actually a huge fan of foreign films, but I was just struggling getting through this. And I don't know if it was like me being seduced by the rhythm and the sounds of the language. And so not wanting to like being frustrated with myself that I couldn't actually just watch the screen and understand the language. If it was me sort of getting ahead of the movie in some ways and not wanting to believe that I was ahead of the movie. But it is really beautiful. The script is beautiful. It kind of makes sense that she's been working under a wonderful mentor, because you kind of see a sophistication in this quote unquote debut film that, you know, I think is hard earned by many young filmmakers. And there's a restraint also, I think, which you don't find in first time filmmakers in terms of like her visual storytelling. It's beautiful. And for those of you much smarter than me, and I sang that with my tongue fully in my cheek, who can sort of enjoy it the first round, I think there's something to get in it.
Well, Jim,
and as you said, you know, see it more than once.
Yeah, Jim and I are both fluent in French, Wolof, and Arabic, which are I think the three languages spoken in the movie. So we didn't really have to look at the subtitles the way you did. But
Totally.
Yeah, Jim, I mean, I want to hear you just say whatever you want to say about it. But one thing that I'm kind of hoping, I thought Tanisha's use of the word restraint is perfect. You know, there's a way in which this film could be so much more florid and flamboyant and calling attention to itself. And it does so much more with silences a lot of the time than a lot of directors could do with music, speech, and noise. But yeah, just tell me in general how you felt about it.
Well, first of all, I'll answer in English so that we can all hear it.
I'll translate it to Wolof as you go.
All right. So it's funny because I usually don't make a lot of notes, but in my notes, I said Ada's quiet strength and resolve. At one point, the pacing is perfect. It's not lazy, but it's not rushed. It's patient. It's a really patient movie, but it didn't feel to me like it required my patience to watch it. It wasn't like, oh man, hurry up, because the cinematography is so beautiful and the imagery is so beautiful and the music is spectacular. But everything, the words are too big that I'm choosing to use right now, because it's everything is understated and just slowly delivered, like somebody just handing you little things. Even the actors are very understated. They're not overacting. They're just delivering their lines in this sort of perfect way. I think for me, normally, in fact, 2 days before, I tried to watch the original Girl with the, Red Dragon Tattoo. I always forget the title. But and I could not get with it because it was a little late and the subtitles were just killing me. I think it might have been on Amazon, which has like microscopic subtitles to begin with, but it just wasn't going to work for me at that time. These subtitles seemed to sort of dissolve for me. And so it didn't, that's not a judgment of Tanisha at all, because at time of day and state of mind have a lot to do with how you consume a movie like this.
Right. Some of it is the gummies you bought in Northampton, I think.
Right. And I'm not taking care of a young child either.
All right. There's well,
but I think you're right.
Yeah, go ahead.
The best foreign films, it does dissolve, and it just kind of like you're just kind of washed away by it. And I think that like I feel like there may be some like epigenetics going on with me about it, and that's part of it. Is that like I think I wanted to be in it even more than I could be, and I think that was like as a viewer, as a watcher, that was my resistance, was that I couldn't be like in it in the way that I, would if it were an American film. I'm sorry, Colin, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to bring that up with you, actually. Let me just pursue that a little bit more with you. I mean, I think, first of all, there's probably less spoken word in this movie than there are in a lot of movies. Once again, it is a movie that relies a lot on silences. This director, Mati Diop, this is a very mature first movie that she is making, and yeah, I'm very much in the fashion of a director like Claire Denis. There are these long stationary camera shots. There's one where we see Ada, the protagonist, just walking down a street toward the camera. It's got to go on for over a minute. And all that's happening is she's walking down this road. But you suddenly notice that despite the fact that Dakar's a pretty big city, this is kind of a dirt road, and there are these kind of ox carts and donkey carts and horse carts that are moving in the other direction past her. And there's a way in which I think, that this director, Mati Diop, is saying, I want you to really look at this. Really look at this, and I'm very sloppy about that kind of thing. I can just sort of visually tune something out pretty easily, and maybe that's a little bit what you're reacting against, Tanisha, is you wanted to just kind of melt into all of those shots of the Atlantic Ocean or the city itself.
Yeah. I mean, that is exactly it, and I think when I had to, because the stretches are, quote unquote long, without a lot of text, that, when the text came in, I had to pull myself out in order to follow what was being said. And because the script is sparse in that way, you kind of do need to understand what they're saying. I think you stated it beautifully. Like that is exactly it. And that the experience of the movie is environmental. It is about this juxtaposition between a very phallic, new building. It literally looks like a vibrator stuck in the middle of this place. It does. You're like, what? Okay. But I think there's something about masculinity and femininity that she's playing with in this movie. You can see it in the color story of the ocean. And I wanted to be in it. Yeah, you said it. Exactly right.
Well, Jim, there is a way in which, I mean, first of all, within the movie, much of the supernatural activity of the movie comes to people in sleep and in dreams, in the manner of an incubus or a succubus in mythology. And there's a way in which I think the director is having us dream too. I mean, maybe one of the reasons that Tanisha doesn't want to be woken up by subtitles is that we are kind of lost in this visual dream that nonetheless has a very discernible plot, unlike most of our dreams.
I would say there's nothing about this movie that smashes you. There's no big ta-das. The way she plays with sort of I saw one description of it where it said it's a horror movie. And while there are elements of supernatural, I think a real horror movie fan would be just so they would be horrified about how unhorrible it is. Even the special effects are just so understated but so effective. It reminded me like that there's a spy movie, Tinker Tailor Soldier, where only one person was shot in the whole 3-hour movie. that's a spy movie, and we expect wham bam explosions and athletics, and the same thing here. Everything is very low key and believable, and in a way that makes it more eerie. And so when something comes to you at night and it's real and it's really possible, that's actually a little more frightening.
I should say that
it feels very much like, I was gonna say, it just feels very much like, Octavia Butler. It feels very much like Black female sci-fi writing and K. Jemisin. I think there's like, if I think of this film and I think of what Jordan Peele does, I think there's something in the way that Black female artists sort of use sci-fi. And I'm just yes-anding what you're saying, Jim. I think that there is a softness and there is a subtlety to the usage of sci-fi, and it really is used as a tool to bring us into a story, tool to bring us into a future idea of a something, which I just kind of love those threads of connection.
All right, we should probably
another
go ahead. Go ahead, and then we'll have to finish up. But go ahead, Jim.
I'm just going to ping pong really quick off that. And this is not a wholly original idea, and I don't think I'm giving away too much plot. But the story starts with the workers, the male workers, being deprived of their pay and stuff. And we think we've sort of met our cast, and we kind of understand our story. And then we meet Suleiman, the male worker's girlfriend, Ada. And one thing that I read about this is that normally in a story like this, when an adventure begins, the people going on the adventure take the audience with them. And we're not thinking about the people left behind. In this story, it's completely about the people left behind, or it's certainly focused on what happens to the people left behind. And in this case, to these women.
All right, so our verdict is you should watch this. That was also the verdict of President Obama when he put out his list of the best movies of 2019. Trust him if you don't trust us. It's called Atlantics. You can find it on Netflix, and we do recommend it. But pick a time when you're both quiet and alert to watch it. That's what I would recommend. All right, let's take a break. We're going to come back. We will recommend things. We are back. I must thank Kat Pastor, who is there in the booth, engineering and making everything sound great, making it possible for the rest of us to work remotely, and once in a while saving us from who knows what. You'll never know. And also to Jonathan McPants, he's the producer of this episode, always the producer of The Nose. We're going to be back on Monday with the scramble. We almost always deal somehow or other with the medical science of COVID. I'm pretty sure we're going to do that again. It is time to make some endorsements. So Jim Chapdelaine, why don't you go first? What do you want to endorse today?
I have a couple of quick things. I'm listening in this house. We're listening to Scene on Radio, a podcast that I'm loving. It's about American history, and it's a deep dive into, I can't believe I'm going to say it, intersectionality. But it is the things we didn't learn in history are very much explored in this series. There's 4 seasons. It's really brilliant, and the guests are fascinating, and they really know their stuff. So there's that. Scene, and Scene is spelled SCENE.
And where do we find this?
It's a podcast. It comes out of Duke. Okay. And it's just really, I'm obsessed with it right now. We took a day trip, and it's my second time there. I would recommend it. It's a quick ride to Lincoln, Mass, where you can go to the De Cordova Sculpture Park Museum. And Julian de Cordova was a Jamaican immigrant who became a titan of industry and left his estate, which was turned into this outdoor sculpture park. So it's a really safe place to go. People wear masks. You can be outside. You can picnic. It's in Lincoln, Mass. It was like, I think, $15 for a whole car to get in. The whole car had 2 people in it. And lastly, the new Haim album. Haim is a group made up of three sisters in LA. It's a very LA record, but I feel like these women have hit their stride with this record, and I really like it. And it just sort of snuck up on me and bashed me, and now I can't take it off.
All right. What have you got for us, Tanisha Dugan?
I'm going to endorse some artists and collaborators who are making art in this pandemic and also fighting for a better us. I'm going to start with Brianna Maya. She is a singer, songwriter. She's got a new song called You Got It that's available everywhere. I'm going to shout out my dear friend Chad Brown Springer, who's working with me on a project and is always in the streets and making music about this moment. Alonzo Beckett of NE Video. He's a filmmaker and video editor who has been making projects with folks about this moment, but also about joy and freedom and excitement and the good things in life through this all. And Alani Alongwe, who is in the midst of writing a musical called At the River I Stand, that is about the Memphis sanitation strike in 1968 and the echoes of that, the shadows of that in the workers' strike of the NBA has become more profound and prominent to me through this week. Just really proud of those artists, mostly local or have touched Hartford in some way, who are really shifting the culture and the moment. Just proud to be in their midst.
All right. Apropos of our beginning conversation, I wanted to endorse or recommend the basketball writing. Well, there's only one example, I think, maybe so far, of Vincent Cunningham of The New Yorker. He's a rising young star at The New Yorker. But his piece, which is up there on the site right now, contrasting Luka Doncic with James Harden, is really, really terrific. Although the person that he writes about the most beautifully is Kawhi Leonard in that piece. And it's The New Yorker is always they always have one really great sports writer, whether it's Roger Angel or, the boxing writing of A.J. Liebling in the past was just so amazing. Vincent Cunningham, I think, might be the new person to do that. And he really, he writes about New Yorker writing about sports is always kind of not so much about sports, and it's more just about the sheer descriptive powers of a really, really good writer. So so check out that. If you have any relationship at all to what I was just talking about, if you even know who those people are, you should definitely do this for fun. And I'm very late to this party, but as Broadway stars chafe at the long absence, they're looking for things to do, and so Christine Baranski, Meryl Streep, and Audra McDonald. Already you've won, right? With that lineup. They did a very tipsy version of The Ladies Who Lunch by Stephen Sondheim from the musical Company, which in which they are actually drinking quite a bit, which is really what the song is about. It's a tribute to Sondheim, I think, that was made on his birthday. But just Google their names together. You'll probably get the video right away. Audra McDonald has to sing last because nobody can sing like Audra McDonald. And we'll watch it all the way to the end because Audra McDonald does something really funny at the end. So one last thing, because the end sometimes gives me a chance to remember to say something that I didn't say. So Drew Brees, for all of his sins, nonetheless has been practicing with the name of Jacob Blake taped on a piece of tape across his helmet, as have many others on the New Orleans Saints. So maybe he learned something. He's actually showing some solidarity right now. NFL teams can't sit out their games because they're not playing any games right now. They have canceled practices. They have put Blake's name on their helmets. All right. Thanks for listening. We will be back on Monday.
Avon, Farmington, yeah.